Sri Aurobindo has described three successive movements which lead us towards the complete realization. The first, internal vision. Second, complete internal experience. And third, identity. Dwelling on through luminous teachings, writings, through philosophers and teachers who describe an experience, and then by thought, inference, imagination, analogy, we form a mental conception and figure of that which we seek to realize, and then we hold that conception in our mind, fix it by an entire and exclusive concentration, and then that gives way to the realization where the veil of the mind is torn apart and the experience fills in as a flood of light. Conception gives place to a knowledge vision in which the self is as real to the inner consciousness as the physical world is to the physical eye. But this inner vision is only one form of the psychological experience. We have then to extend it to a complete internal experience, which Sri Aurobindo describes in all of its facets. First, that we have a mental experience of the self, the consciousness, force, delight, these become real to the mind. Then there is the emotional experience of the self through love and through the emotional delight, and thus the heart experiences the self. Then the aesthetic experience of the self, in which beauty and a delight perception and taste is turned to through the aesthetic mind and the senses have the experience of the self. And then we have the vital nervous experience and practically the physical sense of the self in all life, through the workings, through the powers, forces and energies, and the life and body are satisfied of God. So this kind of a multifaceted, all-encompassing, complete experience is what Sri Aurobindo points to. In the framework of the integral yoga, this multifacetedness of approach and the completeness is always highlighted, otherwise it is not integral. It leads to certain practical difficulties because it means the effort now has to be turned in so many directions. And each of those directions requires a complete effort in itself. So it's as if we are required to put now 4 times more the effort in 4 different directions, and it seems as if this makes the whole journey much more complicated, much more strenuous, and much more difficult. But in practice, this is not what Sri Aurobindo will ask of us. For the practice, Sri Aurobindo leads us step by step through in the next few chapters to a complete, the basic powers, faculties which we will bring into effect for the practice. And then he formulates a single practice that has a multifaceted outcome. And this is the nature of the synthesis which he will formulate in the chapters after. If you see the titles of the chapters, you will see the whole sequence of how the thing develops. After this chapter, the next is the purified understanding, and it's a preparatory phase where the mind is prepared for receiving. Then the next chapter is concentration, and then renunciation. And these three, the purified understanding creating a base, the concentration leading forward, and the renunciation is like a complementing side of the positive effort. These prepare now in the broad tools that we have. And then the chapter just after is the synthesis of the disciplines of knowledge, where a single method is carved out in which all these are included. And subsequently, as the effort proceeds, the release from the subjection to the body is the next chapter, release from the heart and the mind. Then after that, the release from the ego, and eventually from there, the realization of the cosmic self, and so on. So you see how the whole path is being charted out. Sri Aurobindo is literally carving out a new passage, although not essentially different from the conventional yoga of knowledge. In its scope and in its overall practice, there are significant differences. Just the fact that the scope is all encompassing and the practice therefore has to be suitably modified. That itself shows you that something new is being created. In the very next chapter, he begins with the idea that according to our description of what we are seeking to realize will be the means which we will use. So if what we are seeking to realize is this multifaceted realization, then the means also will be something which is multifaceted, or which has a multifaceted result even from a single effort. So, but with all this, still, all the parts of our being now turned to the divine and experiencing the satisfaction of the contact with the divine, he says these are still all this knowledge and experience are primary means of arriving at and of possessing identity. And so now we move to the third stage of identity. It is ourself that we see and experience, and therefore vision and experience are incomplete unless they culminate in identity, unless we are able to live in all our being the supreme Vedantic knowledge, He am I. So in all of these, which we have been describing, the 4 facets of the approach and the experience, in each of them there is a recognition that that divine is ourselves. And so as long as you are having a vision or an experience, there is still a gap. Since it is you that you are discovering, eventually that vision and experience has to merge into an identity. I am this, which I earlier saw, which I earlier experienced, and which I had as a complete experience even, but now I am. So we must not only see God and embrace Him, but become that reality. So these are the 3 stages. Seeing, where you have a glimpse of something which is not you. Then there is the embracement, where there is a contact more and more complete, and in the last stage, there is the merging where you are no more separate. We must become one with the self, and now he describes three grades of that oneness. In its transcendence of all forms and manifestation by the resolution, the sublimation, the escape from itself of ego and all its belongings into that from which they proceed. So this is the first oneness with a transcendence. Second oneness is one with it in the infinite existence, consciousness, peace, delight, by which it reveals itself in us. And then there is the third oneness, and one with it in the action, formation, play of self-conception with which it guards itself in the world. The problem with this is not only you had a multifaceted approach, multifaceted effort, but even the realization is multifaceted. And the realization, even in oneness, is not complete until all three facets of it are realized in identity. And so you see how much more complex the practice would have become if not for the fact that he has carved out a passage of a single practice, a single approach, which has this multifaceted realization. But on the other hand, we can see how, if we did not aim at a multifaceted approach and a multifaceted realization, it would not be complete. We would be left with the same problems which were existent in the past efforts, where someone got to this realization, another got to that realization, and the two remained always in conflict because they are so different in their description, in their experience, and each is incomplete. And to stop short at an incompleteness, to have still the conflict remaining at the last stage, is obviously not the goal of the journey. So Sri Aurobindo has articulated the goal in its most comprehensive form. Although it seems more difficult, he casts out a new path, a new approach and practice by which it is made easy. And we are reminded then of something which he told us right at the beginning, describing the path. He said that because of these things, the path is the most difficult. And yet, in terms of what you realize for the effort that you put, it is the easiest. It is most difficult because all these things are to be taken up. But for the effort that you put, the result is attained by the least effort in relation to other paths. In other paths, you may put a certain quantum of effort to gain a one-sided realization. But with the same effort now, you have a multi-sided, comprehensive realization in all the parts of your being. Obviously, that is much easier for what is gained. And this is one of the reasons why it is often easy to misunderstand or reduce the practice of the integral yoga to some very simplistic formula. And many people tend to get sucked into such formulations. And it seems that's the only way that people find it easy to communicate the nature of the yoga. Well, you just have to offer yourself, do your work as well as you can, and have faith, and he will do everything for you. Those are the quotes which we pick up because they seem to encapsulate all the complexity into a very simple, accessible statement. But in the way these things are spoken of, there is a reduction. And the depth and the scope and the richness of the path and the realization are lost. And very often, if you look at those phrases, you notice that it is put as a single quotation on the wall, but in its origin, there is a whole preparation before, or there is a long discussion of a context in which this comes as a culmination. So, this is as a warning. But here, that is the reason why Sri Aurobindo has taken all the trouble to discuss these things in such detail. So, in the realization of oneness, we see three levels of the oneness. The transcendence he puts first because that is the liberation. If you have not had the oneness with the transcendence of the self, then you are still potentially capable of being bound to something, some form, some aspect of the manifestation. And so the transcendence is first stated in most traditions. The transcendence is considered the peak. You have reached the highest nirvikalpa samadhi, merged into that origin, you do not return anymore. But Sri Aurobindo says, yes, as an experience, one could still call that the peak, but it is incomplete if you have not experienced the manifestation of the Brahman. The self itself has become the world, and so how does the self know itself? Not only in its transcendence, it knows itself as all the infinite existence, consciousness, peace, delight, which are its becomings. So this becomes the second identity. And then even that would be something cosmic. It does not have the individualization of forms. Are we to know the universe only in its cosmicity? What about the play of distinctions and separateness of form? And so that becomes the third realization, because these forms also are forms of the self. So one with it in the action, formation, play of self-conception with which it garbs itself in the world. So we have the self, transcending, free, standing back, even unknowable in its peaks, and then how it knows itself before it manifests in the multiplicity of the world fully, and in the multiplicity, including its separateness, where in the extreme of separateness, it actually takes on garbs, a dress, a clothing, a covering that the self is concealed, although the clothing itself is made of self, and the inhabitant is self. So all three levels. But still, are we to say that we are aiming at three different realizations? The truth is, there is a status in which all three are a single experience. One could, when we approach with the mind's understanding, distinguish between these three as distinct experiences, or even have them as distinct experiences. But if the path has been taken in the way Sri Aurobindo articulates it here and elaborates later, then all three are simultaneously experienced as a single experience, transcending, cosmic, universal, and individualized, where the full spectrum of the play of the self is experienced in the identity. If I had to use an analogy, I'm tempted to use that, though it will be a bit of a reduction still as an analogy. If we had to understand these three in a human experience, I'm drawn to the image of the creator of a game. It may be a computer video game, or it may be a game such as football or basketball. The person who creates, the person who programs the computer, stands back from the computer in all his creation. He is never in it. He can walk out of it. The Olympic body, which defines the rules of hockey or football, they can walk away. They may not be there at all, or they can sit on the bylines and watch. But whatever has been created is not them. They stand back, completely free. And in their absolute freedom, they can change what is created. The programmer can tweak the code, rewrite the code, change the code, walk away from the computer, shut it down, switch it on. He's completely free. And the next level is when you enter the game and you experience the whole of the game. So in the one who formulates the rules of the game, he has to look at all the possibilities, all the different activities and positions of all the players and all the relationships and see the whole game as a whole, not being stuck to any one piece of it. So I, as a programmer, write a game, write a video game in which everything from the scenery to the characters which move around and storyline, all of these are taken into account. And in the storyline, all the possibilities of what can be. So let's say for a common type of game that children play with, where they are catching things or jumping around. Okay, in case you get knocked out, you have a second chance and a third chance, so you can have 3 lives or 10 lives. Or I can allow you to accumulate lives by going to special locations. You can set the broad rules of the game, but you're defining the scope, the broad theme of the whole experience. And then there is the third stage in which I, as a programmer, actually enter into it and play it as one of the players. And I take one role and other people take other roles, in which I'm fully immersed in that individual experience and I see the whole game from the viewpoint of a single player. And at that point, what is my focus? The actions that I have to do and the relationships of energies that I create with others, the arrangements, the attempt to change circumstances, but seen from inside a single individual. So I, as a player, have not fully experienced the scope of my play unless I have entered into it and played from within what I created from outside. So the full experience of the self is on all 3 levels, where he enjoys from within the form of a single ant the immensity of the cosmos, even as he stands back from it and can turn away and walk away from it as if it is utterly immaterial, or as he embraces the whole universe as his own self-expression of delight, of existence, consciousness, peace, and delight. So all 3 are to be included in the totality of the identity. This is now the completion of the theme for what is the status of knowledge that we seek. And Sri Aurobindo now briefly digresses to help us to understand what this experience is like. Because he says it is difficult for the modern mind to understand how we can do more than conceive intellectually of the self or of God. For the modern mind. But this is not the case always in history or for all the different types of mind that humanity has been evolving through or developing in its different traditions or cultures. There is a certain turn of mind in which this whole idea of the self or of God is so vivid, so real, that you wonder why someone can doubt it. It is as real as the air that you breathe, although you cannot touch it, you cannot see it, but you breathe it and you feel it in the identity of your body's joy of breathing and the freshness that you experience. So vivid is the self. I had once an interesting interaction with someone in the Indian Navy. I was at Visakhapatnam for a conference in the Naval Command, and one of the officers was assigned to take me to the museum, and he was discussing things, knowing that I've come from the ashram, so we were discussing some things. And then on his own, he confided his experience. He said, when I'm here, and this is on the beach, the ocean, where he goes out for months together in the submarine as a submarine officer, he says, when I'm here, this is my world. There is nothing else. But I had asked him, "Where are you from? How is it you're near the sea?" He said, "I'm from the Himalayas. My home is in the hills." I said, "How do you end up with the ocean? I thought you would love the hills." So he said, "It's different." He says, "When I'm here, this is my world. But when I go back, as I go up the hills, the higher I go, all this fades away. And then the world of my ancestors, my village, becomes more and more real. And there I feel the reality of God. So as I go up the hill, it's as if God becomes more real and I'm in that world. And then after I've stayed there for my holidays, when I come back down the hill, that world begins to fade. And by the time I come here, I'm back in this world, and God and all those things, the gods are all unreal. So when he described that, he actually spoke of gods and divine beings that live, that are existent to him, are real to him. But he's as if swinging between these two worlds. And this is the world of the modern mind, where all those things are somehow abstract. The character of the modern mind, which makes those things abstract, is an exaggerated focus on the analytic intellect and the physical mind, the sensory body consciousness, in which the analytic intellect is now embedded most superficially. And so, in the body consciousness, the only thing which you can see with your senses is real. All other things are felt unreal. But the moment we disengage from the body consciousness, the moment we stand back from the analytic mind and feel with the heart, with the inner intuition, the inner feel, closeness of the soul, all those things are exactly where they were. They never went away. So, but still, for the modern mind, we need some tool now to help this mind to recognize what this is all about. What can it be like? So Sri Aurobindo says, but it may borrow some shadow of this vision, experience, and becoming from that inner awakening to nature, which a great English poet has made a reality to the European imagination. So we're going to borrow a shadow of this vision, experience, and becoming. So he's describing the domain of that knowledge as vision, experience, and becoming. Again, a different way of articulating what was stated before. You see, and then you experience in the embrace, and then you become one with it. But a shadow of that will come through this English poet. If we read the poems in which Wordsworth expressed his realization of nature, we may acquire some distant idea of what that realization is. For first, we see that he had the vision of something in the world. Now you'll see the three steps described here: the vision, experience, and then the becoming. First, we see he had the vision of something in the world, which is the very self of all things that it contains, a conscious force and presence other than its forms, yet cause of its forms and manifested in them. So we find these things in the poetry of Wordsworth. There are, of course, many examples one could draw on. Sri Aurobindo himself touches on a few, which we will see shortly. Then we perceive that he had not only the vision of this and the joy and peace and universality which its presence brings, but the very sense of it, mental, aesthetic, vital, physical. Not only the sense and vision in its own being, but in the nearest flower and the simplest man and the immobile rock. And finally, that he even occasionally attained to that unity, that becoming the subject of his dedication, one phase of which is powerfully and profoundly expressed in the poem, "A slumber did my spirit seal." So he has first a vision of this sense of the self penetrating everything with different. Then he has the experience where he feels it in the mental, aesthetic, vital, physical, and then not only in himself, in the flowers, in the rock, and then occasionally he attains to that unity of becoming one with the object of his dedication. And then Sri Aurobindo is taking this one example of the poem, A slumber did my spirit seal, where he describes himself as become one in his being with earth, rolled round in its diurnal course with rocks and stones and trees. This is the quote. So I'll read out the whole poem. It's a very short one, but it goes something like this. So, the title of the poem, A Slumber Did My Spirit Seal. A slumber did my spirit seal. I had no human fears. She seemed a thing that could not feel the touch of earthly years. No motion has she now, no force. She neither hears nor sees. Rolled round in earth's diurnal course with rocks and stones and trees. So that's all. Two stanzas, 4 lines each. The first one, you will notice, dwells on the idea of this she being somehow free from earthly time and earthly limits. The background to this poem, as we are told, is that he is describing the death of a young girl. So she has now become free from the limitations of the earth. But in the second stanza, there is this silence of something which is free and yet which is one and which stands in the movement of the earth, identified. So you'll find throughout there is the sense of something freed but immanent, universal, and he identifies with the experience of the whole earth and of nature. So again I read, A slumber did my spirit seal. That is, the sleep is as if sealed. I had no human fears, the freedom from human limitation. She seemed a thing that could not feel the touch of earthly years. Freedom from earthly time, but it does not mean that you're free from time sense. The time sense may now be universal. The individuality is also now transcended, so no motion has she now, no force. She neither hears nor sees, rolled round in earth's diurnal course with rocks and stones and trees. So all the rocks and stones and trees are as if one being, one body, and she is one with that whole oneness of the earth as the earth is rolling around in her daily routine movement, whirling around herself, around the sun. But she individually has no force, no movement. She is one with the larger movement of the earth, as if with the universe, with the universal consciousness of the earth. So he says, Sri Aurobindo says, one phase of which, of that becoming, is powerfully and profoundly expressed in the poem, A slumber did my spirit seal, where he describes himself as become one in his being with earth, rolled round in its diurnal course with rocks and stones and trees. So if we take this as a first starting point, Sri Aurobindo says, exalt this realization to a profounder self than physical nature. And we have the elements of the yogic knowledge. So the peak that he has, that Wordsworth has touched, from there you go beyond nature to a deeper self, and that's the beginning of the yogic knowledge. So you see how many more stages one has to go through to get the full realization, but still, you can see how this is an entry point, a beginning, a touch of something greater. And it is that which makes this poem so special. Because although stated in very simple words, even an image which is very simple, we feel behind the words, behind the image, something more profound, something more deep, which as if touches or even carries or draws us to it. There's even, if you forget the specifics of the circumstance of this young girl or her death or anything else, and just stay on the, meditate on the power of the words suggest something much more, which even he may not have intentionally intended, as happens in any inspired poetry. When he says, "A slumber did my spirit seal," the sense of it from the yogic point of view would be the sense of entering a deep trance, where my surface consciousness goes as if into sleep. The world outside is now sealed. I had no human fears because I'm lost to the surface human personality. I'm in a freedom within. She seemed a thing that could not feel the touch of earthly years, and I'm in a consciousness that somehow is not bothered with the pace of human time and human circumstances. But also in the stillness within, no motion has she now, no force. She neither hears nor sees, because indrawn into this trance-like state, the outer senses are sealed, but in that trance consciousness, I am one with nature, and in particular with the form of the earth and her long sense of time of billions of years and her whirling movement, which is also so gigantic, cosmic, rolled around in Earth's diurnal course with rocks and stones and trees. And all the rocks, stones, and trees bring the sense of lasting time. They're all, at least the rocks and stones, are billions of years old. So there is this immensity and this sense of time and space which is immense, and the slow whirling that takes place in a consciousness indrawn, disengaged from the humdrum of superficiality in a deep state of trance. So you can read the poem in a very different sense, and you can see how it's like gateway, a beginning of a deeper experience. But he says, even after one has gone deeper into the profounder self than physical nature, and the elements of yogic knowledge are now growing in it, but all this experience is only the vestibule to that supra-sensuous, supra-mental realization of the transcendent, who is beyond all his aspects. So it's the vestibule, just the first entry point, and after that there's so much more that is still waiting. And the final summit of knowledge can only be attained by entering into the superconscient and there merging all other experience into a supernal unity with the ineffable. That is the culmination of all divine knowing. That also is the source of all divine delight and divine living. So you will see two things repeated in Sri Aurobindo's writings. First, that he never stops short. He always points all the way to the highest that one must get to. And it does not mean that it trivializes these steps before. We need not feel frustrated that that feels so far. The steps we should always keep in mind are steps towards that. This is extremely important because since the tools of this yoga are also primarily psychological, our conception of the goal and the sense of the focus we keep our sight on determines where we are going, but also how far we go and how fast we go. As long as we keep before us that highest goal, whatever much we may do, however much we may have wonderful experiences in the from the conventional point of view, we know that that is not enough and it is only the beginning. And the protection of the exaggeration of the ego, and especially of the spiritual ego, is automatically there because we see how much more there is, and we are still in the preliminaries. On the other hand, every step that we take, however firm, however established, however significant in the journey, is always a step in that direction and not a wandering away from the path towards some temporary realization or some digression to some incidental power or experience. We're always moving in the forward direction. So just this reconnecting to the highest goal prevents us from many possible dangers in the journey. And the second thing which he always highlights, reminds us, is that although the highest transcends, it also is the source for everything that is manifested. He brings back the affirmative, the positive, the manifesting aspect, even as we are moving towards a greater liberation and consciousness. So that is also the source of all divine delight and divine living, and the life itself is going to come from that source in the supernal unity with the ineffable. That status of knowledge is then the aim of this path, and indeed all paths when pursued to their end, to which intellectual discrimination and conception, and all concentration and psychological self-knowledge, and all seeking by the heart through love, and by the senses through beauty, and by the will through power and works, and by the soul through peace and joy, are only keys, avenues, first approaches, and beginnings of the ascent, which we have to use and to follow till the wide and infinite levels are attained and the divine doors swing open into the infinite light. So it's one sentence through the whole paragraph, but in that one sentence there are four very distinct ideas. The first is that that status is the aim of this path, but indeed of all paths when pursued to their end. Now straight away that tells us something very important. All paths when pursued to the end, they lead to that same status of knowledge, but the difference between the paths is that, yes, they may approach from different directions, but that they don't always go to the end. This is the biggest difference you will find in so many traditions. They define for themselves a goal, an end. But that goal is not the highest that he is describing here. And so when they stop short to that goal, they seem not to have reached this. And so we can say they have different goals and different results. But if they continued on, then they would come to the same status of knowledge. And now to get to this, there are several keys, avenues, first approaches, and beginnings. Now you see the four things which he describes are also very suggestive. You are going to start a journey, but first there's a door which blocks your way. You can knock on the door, you can bang on it, but it doesn't open. You need the key. So the key is something very small. The door is large, but with that small turn, with a small movement, with a small object, the large door opens. And this huge wall which was blocking your way has a little opening which allows you to enter and cross the barrier. However big the wall, however small the door, at least you get through. And what gets you through is this very tiny key with a very tiny movement. The door itself may be so big that you have to push hard to swing it open, but the key is always small and you make a small movement. So this is the important thing in the practice of the yoga. There is a key always. And with that little turn, everything now is open. You still have to journey, but at least the way is open. Second is the avenue. Well, now you've gone through the door, it's still a very narrow path. And you have to be careful because you can easily go astray. You have to be vigilant because in the early stages there are many things which by simple deviation, simple exaggeration can take you off. So as they keep reminding us in the yogic tradition, it is like walking on the edge of the sword, edge of the knife, Kshurasya Dhara. You have to be extremely careful to maintain your balance. A little bit here, a little bit there. Both sides you can overdo. You can underdo or overdo both sides still are exaggerations and take you off. You lose balance. But after that avenue has been crossed and you've come to some basic stage of the journey where the foundation has been set, then things are not as precarious. There are still dangers, but at least now there is an awakened discrimination and inner guidance and support, discrimination from the psychic. And you know when things are going off track, you know where you have to go, you know where the dangers are, especially when the intuition now begins to show you also the way. So after that comes the third stage, which is first approaches. You can now see the goal, you can move towards it, you are no more stumbling blind. Where is the goal? I don't know, but I have to keep doing my effort until at some point I will glimpse the goal. Now the goal is glimpsed, and anything you do beyond this is a first approach. But still a first approach. There are greater approaches to come until the embrace and then the identification. And after the first approaches, the contact is made now. And after that, it is only a question of deepening the contact and embracement in all facets. And so at that point, beginnings. He's keeping the journey, of course, as a movement upwards. So keys, avenues, first approaches, and beginnings of the ascent of the consciousness. So what are these keys, avenues, first approaches, and beginnings? And now he lists what we have already earlier seen. And this being the last paragraph, it summarizes everything which we have read in this chapter. So towards that aim, to which intellectual discrimination and conception, and all concentration and psychological self-knowledge are keys, avenues, first approaches, and beginnings. This is one. Then, all seeking by the heart through love, and by the senses through beauty, and by the will through power and works, and by the soul through peace and joy. All of which are again keys, avenues, first approaches, and beginnings. So we have five. There's a five-fold journey, taking broadly the five parts of our nature and then the soul within. So we see now with the intellect, it is discrimination, which are the stages we have discussed in the chapter. You discriminate what is permanent, what is impermanent, what is self, what is not self, movement of self, what is phenomenon of self. And the discrimination helps you now to bring your attention to that which is more important. And then conception, you conceive after what is the nature of this self, what is the presence and character of this. You have a mental idea. And then the concentration leading to psychological self-knowledge. So discrimination, conception, concentration, psychological self-knowledge, all are tools approaching through the intellect. Next is seeking by the heart through love. Then seeking by the senses through beauty, seeking by the will through power and works. Now you see these broadly take care of all the parts of our nature, and then deep within, by the soul through peace and joy. The soul need not be the psychic being, but just the inner being through peace and joy. And these are the five facets through which we enter in relation with the divine and feel the contact an identity with the divine consciousness. So all these we have to use as keys, avenues, first approaches, and beginnings of the ascent, which we have to use and to follow till the wide and infinite levels are attained and the divine doors swing open into the infinite light. So after a point, these keys, avenues, first approaches, and beginnings will no more be necessary because the wide and infinite levels are attained and the divine doors swing open. What is this door compared to the first door? So there is a stage when the individual consciousness has now entered this wide and infinite levels. There is a cosmic consciousness already attained. And then successively higher gradations of consciousness. And the suggestion here of the divine doors is the divine doors which open into the infinite light of the supramind. Sri Aurobindo refers to the overmental consciousness as the lid, the golden lid, beyond which is the supramental consciousness. And this is perhaps the suggestion that there is a stage beyond which we are now in it in the highest. So with this we complete the status of knowledge. The first chapter was a discussion on the object of knowledge. What is it that we are seeking to realize? The second chapter, the status of knowledge, now discusses what is the nature of the realization and, in a sense, the means towards it. And now, the next chapter, the purified understanding, starts the process, the foundation of the actual practice. Begins this with a quick summary of the relationship with the discussions before, and then moves with the forward practice itself. The description of the status of knowledge to which we aspire determines the means of knowledge which we shall use. Very simply stated, these are some of these very profound principles of any yogic practice. How you describe what you aim to realize will determine the method which you will use. So in the very thing which you have conceived of and the description of it is implied the method by which you will get to it. And the status of knowledge, since we are talking of the yoga of integral knowledge, determines the means of knowledge which we shall use. Now what will follow in practice for the next 3 chapters? Although Sri Aurobindo uses the vocabulary of the yoga of integral knowledge, you will find the descriptions apply equally to the yoga of integral devotion and the yoga of integral works. All the descriptions, we must keep in mind, will apply to all 3 broad paths, although primarily the vocabulary will focus on the yoga of integral knowledge. So, that status of knowledge which we have described, that status of knowledge may be summed up as a supramental realization which is prepared by mental representations through various mental principles in us, and once attained, again reflects itself more perfectly in all the members of the being. So we've used these mental principles to get to that. Once we get that, again that turns around and reflects through these principles more and more perfectly. So there's a double ladder, one of ascent and one of descent. It is a re-seeing and therefore a remolding of our whole existence in the light of the divine and one and eternal, free from subjection to the appearances of things and the externalities of our superficial being. So this reflecting more perfectly in our members. What does that mean? And that's what he has now explained. A re-seeing. When that realization reflects in our members, we have not yet spoken of a transformation, but we are moving towards the transformation. From this reflection, we begin to now view everything in a new light. The same goal now seen through the members awakened to it in a new light, and our whole remolding of our existence in terms of that light, and the remolding is the beginning of the transformation. Depending on the light to which you have attained, the transformation is to that extent to be worked on. So, implied in this simple description is a movement of ascent, a movement of descent, but which is happening constantly. With each step up is the descent of the re-seeing now from the new light of the new consciousness and the remolding of our whole existence, eventually in terms of the highest, in the light of the divine and one and eternal. He uses three words, and whenever Sri Aurobindo uses words, they all mean the same thing: D capital, O capital, E capital. But when he takes the trouble to use different words, it's because he's suggesting something that you can see it in two ways. In different parts of our consciousness, of our being, the relationship with the divine is stronger, or the relationship with the oneness is stronger, or the relationship with the eternity, the eternal, is stronger. So, for example, what's the mind? The sense of the eternal is more natural. To the body, the sense of the divine, the sacred divinity in all things, is more natural. To the heart, the sense of oneness is more natural. And so when we know the divine in all our being and through all our members, each of our members tends to articulate that same one self in what is most natural to its temperament, to its nature. So when he's used all three words, it is to highlight this multifacetedness in the three parts of our being. But when things are remolded in the light of the divine, the one, the eternal, free from subjection to the appearances of things and the externalities of our superficial being. So there are two freedoms: the freedom from the appearances of things outside us, and the external freedom from the externalities of our own superficial being. So the bulk of the experience is being had in the inner being, which now is freed from these limitations of the outer things and of our own outermost parts. And it is in these inner domains that this light of the divine, the one and the eternal free, is being experienced, and the remolding of our existence is taking place first in these parts, and then later it will extend into those other parts. So you see how in a very few words, so much has been captured, even the broad framework has been set. What now follows is an elaboration of the specifics and the how of this journey. Such a passage from the human to the divine, from the divided and discordant to the one, from the phenomenon to the eternal truth, such an entire rebirth or new birth of the soul must necessarily involve two stages. One of preparation, in which the soul and its instruments must become fit, and another of actual illumination and realization in the prepared soul through its fit instruments. So again, one sentence but conveying many important ideas. First, he is describing the journey itself, from human to divine, from divided and discordant to oneness, to the one, and from the phenomenon to the eternal truth, involving an entire rebirth or new birth of the soul. So in the very first step, human to divine, we are looking at it in the most general way. How do we define ourselves? We say we are human because we are not animal, we are not plant, we are not stone. But what distinguishes this humanness, and we can have many descriptions. But broadly, it is a bundle of behavior patterns and powers of consciousness working within those behavior patterns. So if we meet a very sophisticated monkey, we will say it is still not human because the awareness that it carries does not have these powers which we have. So we'll make certain distinctions like that. We may meet a being from another planet and we will say, oh, he is not human because, and again, we will find something to differentiate ourselves. So there's a bundle, again, a bundle of consciousness powers and habitual behavior patterns. So we say to somebody, this behavior is inhuman. But the person may say, but it is normal in certain animals. It is the normal in our culture, he may say. But so again, we have defined certain parameters and we associate certain behaviors as inhuman when they deviate too far from those parameters. For example, a punishment which involves death to a person. In some part in us, we feel that as inhuman, unless it is an extreme crime, but at least for stealing or for simple uh, crimes of passion, we'll say to commit someone to death is inhuman. Why? Because somewhere deep inside us, we feel the sanctity of human life, the sacredness of the divine presence in beings, in people. And if somebody does not feel that sacredness and there's a pattern of behavior emerging from that insensitivity, we will say barbaric or inhuman. So this is a broad description, but the human itself is defined by limitation. And the limitation here is inability to grow beyond these limits into which we are bound by our current evolution. We are not able, for example, to rise above certain tendencies of anger, of jealousy, of hatred. We are not able to free from our errors of knowledge, errors in communications, and we seem as if bound in this bundle of habits to certain limitations. So, having defined ourselves in terms of humanity, we recognize that we are insufficient, and there is within us an aspiration for something which we describe as an ideal, unreal, that is perfect knowledge, perfect love, or true love, or universal love, perfect action, or complete power over circumstances, that we can wield things as necessary without limitation, all strength, or being able to make something beautiful as we feel it should be, but are unable even to visualize because of limitations of our visual capacity, and so on. So there are things which we feel as an ideal individually, and then in our collective life, we should be as a society caring for each other, looking after each other, encouraging each other, supporting each other in our growth with harmony and with etc. So that none may have anything, any lack. All should be freely able to share and so on. But all of these are as if impossible to attain in the bundle that we have formed that we call our humanness. So that's very humanness by which we distinguish ourselves as superior from all others is the bundle which limits us and prevents us from getting to this sense of the ideal that we have. So the passage from the human to that, the divine, is a new birth or an entire rebirth because we are no more human after that. Now, more generally, what is the nature of the human consciousness? What causes it to be limited in this way and what makes us dissatisfied is from the discordant, from the divided and discordant to the one. We are ourselves not one person, we are made up of so many pieces. Highlighted particularly by the different parts. My mind is different from my heart, which have different needs, and my body has its own needs, and they're all in different directions, at different times, each following its own rhythms, and then my soul within suffers because it has its own ideals and aspirations. So we are divided, we are in conflict with each other, we are a crowd. This gives rise to all the limitations in our external life, where again we are divided and discordant among each other, and then still larger towards the universe, we are divided and discordant with nature. So when from that division and discordancy, we move to the one. It doesn't say oneness, but to the one. We will experience in ourselves the one with many facets. When we are recast in terms of that one, we will experience similarly in our collective life, each one of us as an aspect of the one, and all the universe and nature itself similarly held as powers, aspects, and a whole manifestation of the one. So again here this is an entire rebirth or new birth, because we are no more anything as we were before. And finally, from the phenomenon to the eternal truth, and this is the most abstract of the three, in the sense that everything which we are experiencing here is phenomenon, the truth is never seen. What is the truth? The problem is we can't even conceive of it, we can't even articulate it, because it is something outside the domain of our tools of expression. But we sense it, and we would describe it in these terms. Something is true when it exists by itself, when it is real, when it is not transitory. And so everything else which is in transition, in constant change, which is dependent on other things to be real, or which is just a partial appearance, a partial truth, not really true by itself, all of these are phenomena. Now, if you look at the universe, everything is like this. What is true? And the closest we come to is in subjective experience when we say, I am trying to be true to my ideal. I am trying to be true to my aspiration. And we use terms like this, but they all have to do with abstractions. You cannot reduce it to a form. But within we feel something living, something real, something eternal, something that exists by itself, which is more vivid somehow than everything else. And we try to be true to that. So when we have this passage from human to the divine, from the divided and discordant to the one, in this new birth, it will be an eternal truth which will be more and more overtly expressed, even if it uses phenomenon as a mask and as a means. And you will feel in all things that truth, even if you cannot define what it is. This is the same problem we face when we try to define beauty. If beauty could be reduced to a single or even multiple mathematical formulae, then I would program my computer to churn out beautiful things. But when I try to program it by a reduced formula, yes, these are pretty, but after a while they are stayed. It is the same old thing. They don't have beauty anymore. Or momentarily, when the first thing comes out, oh, that's beautiful. And by the time the 10th has come out, it has all become stale. Even the first one now doesn't look as beautiful. So we notice the essence of beauty is something which is not tied to the form. It can infuse itself in form. On the other hand, when an artist truly creates something beautiful, we look at that object, perhaps across centuries, people continue to look at it and gaze at it and say, this is beautiful. Even though human tastes have changed. And it has caught something of eternity in a form which is temporal. Words, thoughts, gestures, actions, created forms, all of these can become vehicles for this truth. and a truth eternal especially. So from phenomenon to the eternal truth would be the nature of the life in a divine life, where constantly we express that truth. But the closest we can come to such an experience is when we look at the experience we had, and I use that word deliberately, with the mother. And I say we had with the mother, it's because somewhere deep within us, all of us, there is a part where we can feel what it was like to be with her. Because either we can say it's more superficially, we were with her, if not in this life, in another life. But more profoundly, we are with her in that part, even now, at each moment. And because we are with her in that part, somewhere deep within us, we know what it is like, what it was like to be with her. And so when we read those beautiful moments, those descriptions, those experiences of some of those who had the privilege of working closely with her, there's a kind of a deep resonance and a familiarity, and we can as if share in that almost magical experience. My teacher, N.P. Pandit, used to say that to be with her at each moment it was a learning experience. It was always a surprise. Whatever fixed idea you went with, she always surprised you and was ahead in some way and opened new insights and new possibilities. Just being in her presence, you had the sense of growing and at each point learning, growing, changing. And that's the nature of this experience of eternal truth manifesting in and through phenomenon of life. So such a passage is of course an entire rebirth or new birth of the soul. Soul here again is not the deepest soul but the inner being. And such a passage must necessarily involve two stages. Why is it necessary that it should involve two stages? The stages are preparation, in which the instruments are made fit, and then the actual illumination and realization on this fitness. So why is it necessary? He says must necessarily involve, because we are dealing with, in this passage, we are aiming at something which is so different. It's almost a new birth. It is a new birth. It is so different that there is nothing in the current consciousness which is even able to resonate directly with what we are seeking. Nothing in the human which has the character of the divine. There is nothing in our discordant and divided consciousness which has the character of the one. There is nothing in our phenomenon which has anything of the eternal truth. So obviously, if you're trying to get to something which has no relationship at all with you, it's impossible. So the first stage is one of making fit or make a preparation. So he says, one of preparation in which the soul and its instruments must become fit. And the fitness here is defined by the ability now to enter in relation with those things and to receive those things. And two things that have to be made fit, the soul and the instruments. Soul and nature. The instruments here are our mind, our emotional being, our life energies, our senses, our body, our will. And the soul is the inhabiting person who works through these instruments. Both of these have to be made fit. Why? Because in this transformation, in this new birth, I who experience will undergo a radical change. I will no more be me as I used to be. This is not so uncommon in our experience when we look back at what we were like 10 years ago, at least in the spiritual life. 10 years is a long time. And we look back at that person and we say, I don't recognize him or her. Was that me? I'm embarrassed. I'm so different. I think differently. I'm a different person. Yes, it's part of my memories of having been in this body, but even this body is not that body. everything is so different. It's like a new birth every so many years, depending on the pace of our growth. But I undergo a change, a radical change. And then the instruments themselves undergo such a radical change. The mind, as it moves from a divided and discordant working, will be able to experience oneness. It will be able to know infinity. It will be able to see and know things in continuity and manifest that. And so, is it the same mind? No, it's changed. Is it the same heart? No, it's changed. Even the body tissue, the senses, of course, undergo a huge change, but the body tissue eventually could undergo a similar change. So, the soul and its instruments must go through preparation, must become fit. And then the second stage, and another of actual illumination and realization in the prepared soul through its fit instruments. So the illumination comes growing to a realization in the prepared soul through its fit instruments. So both sides are there. Now if you think about it, when does the first stage end? When does the second stage start? So it's not like the system where the next 2 years you are going to go through a preparation phase, during which time you will not have any experience, you will not have any illumination, any realization. You will only work on preparation. It doesn't work. Obviously, as the preparation begins to grow, there are glimpses already. So how do you really separate the two stages? You can't. And this is what he says here. There is indeed no rigid line of demarcation in sequence of time between these two stages. Rather, they are necessary to each other and continue simultaneously. So in time, we don't have a step. Now first stage has ended and the second stage starts. Throughout, even in the second stage, the first stage of preparation is growing, a greater preparation, a greater capacity. And even as we've started the preparation, the illuminations and realizations can begin already to form in a small way. So they are actually two parallel movements simultaneously taking place. The difference is only of where the emphasis is. So initially the emphasis is more on the preparation, and in this later on the emphasis is more on the illumination and realization, which assists the still higher preparation anyway. For in proportion as the soul becomes fit, it increases in illumination and rises to higher and higher, completer and completer realizations. And in proportion as these illuminations and these realizations increase, becomes fit, and its instruments more adequate to their task. So each is leading to the other. There are soul seasons of unillumined preparation and soul seasons of illumined growth and culminating soul moments, more or less prolonged, of illumined possession. Moments that are transient, like the flash of the lightning, that change the whole spiritual future. Moments also that extend over many human hours, days, weeks, in a constant light or blaze of the sun of truth. So now he is giving us an image, seasons and moments. But the image is actually very profound. When we have read Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Veda, this dimension awakens in us, so that whenever he uses these words, suddenly we know, aha, there's something deeper behind it. It's not merely a poetic image. It is a symbol of something more profound. He speaks of seasons. Seasons of unillumined preparation and seasons of illumined growth. You'll find in the Veda, they speak of two mothers. The dark mother who nourishes, and the light mother who also nourishes. The cycles of day and night. The cycles of darkness extending across months, and the cycles of light, of illumination across months. And then we have the seasons, which have very distinct characters. So the seasons where the light is growing after the equinox, the light begins to grow, the darkness begins to lessen. And then the reversal, the seasons where the light begins to become less and the darkness begins to become longer, again hitting some balance and then reversing. And all of these external seasons and cycles are actually representations. You would like to use the word symbol because, in a deeper sense, as truths represented on a different level of the nature of the inner rhythms of our journey. So, just speaking of soul seasons of unillumined preparation and soul seasons of illumined growth brings immediately this connection. And we accept that sometimes there is a time needed. And whatever we may do to hasten it, finally the season has to complete before that next season changes. And there are other times where we make an effort to shorten that phase and bring in the new season faster. But this is the nature of things. We just have to accept that. And that's one of the reasons why you will find very early on, Sri Aurobindo speaks of the 4 aids, and one of them is Kala, time, cyclic rhythm of time. Sri Aurobindo describes how he himself had to pass, even at a very advanced stage in his yoga, he had to pass through what he calls dry seasons, where there was no progress at all apparently. For even he, I think he mentioned 6 or 8 months. But the idea being that it seems as if there is no growth of the light, but in fact, there is the growth of the preparation. So, what he is referring to as the uh, unillumined season is unillumined preparation. And on the other side, there is the illumined growth and culmination, the illumined growth, and then separate from these seasons, which are cyclic, which have rhythms and so on, there are moments which burst in. So these he calls now soul moments, more or less prolonged, of illumined possession, moments that are transient, like the flash of lightning. So now the moments themselves may come in between, irrespective of the seasons. So the lightning can come at night, it can also come in the day. Doesn't matter. But we value it most when it comes at night because it lights up the whole thing. But it still comes in a flash, and in that flash you see the whole territory around you, and then it's gone. And then you have now to journey in the imprint left by that flash. And then the flash comes again, and then later perhaps the soul moments itself may be of a longer duration. But they're still transient, and they are the exception to the cycle of the season. So we may find that we may pass through a cycle of unillumined preparation with brief flashes. Or we may be in the cycle of illumined growth, and then again the flashes give for these large bursts of new insights and rapid awakenings. And although they may be transient, yet they change the whole spiritual future with that one flash. Moments also that extend over many human hours. Now, it may still be a moment. In human time, it may last several hours, but in terms of what it reveals to you, it comes as a flash and it goes away, and it's as if the experience is gone. But during the time it was there, it could be hours, days, and weeks. I remember an incident narrated by somebody in the ashram. As a young girl, the mother had given her a role in a play where she was the angel watching the earthly scene from the inner worlds. And she was to sit on this swing which was decorated with flowers because it belongs to the angelic domains. And she would gently swing like that, enjoying but observing the play of the world below. So it was a consciousness of witnessing but also of enjoying. but enjoying it as a divine play, as a Leela. So as she was playing that role, really keep in mind that the mother never did these trivially. She assigned the roles and also gave the experience. She said at the end of that whole play, she found herself living in that consciousness, as if a part of her was in this high spiritual domain, looking down at the earth scene in a very curious, disinterested way, but enjoying it at the same time, not really involved in it, belonging to that domain. And then she was in it. She said it just continued and continued for days, weeks, months, and then gradually it began to fade. And about a year down, it faded. So she was a little unhappy about it, and she spoke to the mother. And the mother explained that it has not gone away, it has only receded behind the surface consciousness. And it is a fact, perhaps it was a special imprint of her nature, it is a fact that even to this day you can meet her and you feel that same backdrop of her consciousness. That's a relationship with life in the inner being. So it was a transient experience like a flash, yet it may extend over many human hours, days, and weeks in a constant light or blaze of the sun of truth. So he's making a distinction between soul seasons and soul moments on one side, and then the human hours, days, and weeks. And then within the soul space, there is the soul season and the soul moment. Now, all of these are profound spiritual truths, and we can dwell on them. But understanding that this is how things are helps us in the journey. That when the seasons change, we don't worry too much. We understand that now we're in a phase of assimilation, of preparation, and the preparation is going to lead to a new growth. So it's fine. And now we focus on the preparation, knowing that the growth will come. When the flashes come, we know that these are special aids that come to us. In our human hours, days, and weeks, there is the flash of the soul moment. This is soul moment, even if it lasts for human weeks, it is still a moment for the soul because it is a glimpse of an aspect, an experience, and it passes. But it comes from that source, from the light and blaze of the sun of truth. Again, when he uses two words, you have to dwell on it. Why? In a constant light or blaze of the sun of truth. What's the difference between light and blaze? When you have the sunlight in the cold season, in winter, you're happy to stand in the sun. You soak in the sun. It's actually a great relief from the period of darkness and the chill and the cold to have the warmth of the sunlight. You embrace it. But when you stand in the blaze of the sun in the summer, the heat is so intense, you are tempted to withdraw, to hide from it because you can't bear its intensity. In both cases, it is the same sun, it is the same light, but the difference of intensity changes completely our response and relationship to it. And they do happen in the spiritual journey. Illuminations which are like the light, very beautiful and luminous, supporting like a nourishment. And then there are those blazing intensities which are overwhelming, too intense to bear. And so we even tend to shrink from it and to withdraw from that too intense experience, so that we may go back and prepare better to be able to receive that. So the difference is really how much our current preparation is able to absorb comfortably and what it is not able to absorb comfortably. The difference of intensity is that. And through all these, the soul once turned Godwards grows towards the permanence and perfection of its new birth and real existence. So, as in the journey of life, and all of our life journey is now symbolic of this spiritual journey. once turned Godwards, the soul grows towards two things: permanence and perfection of its new birth and real existence. In the beginning, all these experiences are brief. We work to make them more permanent. Second, with each experience, when it recasts through reflection and through change our consciousness, we grow in perfection in our own receptive base and substance. So, permanence of the experience and the change of consciousness, perfection of the instruments and of the manifestation of the new consciousness. And again, he uses two words: of its new birth and real existence. So, the soul's new birth and the soul's real existence. And the idea is this: the soul as it is, I, the person who am, whether the outermost or the inner or the inmost, doesn't matter. This center of consciousness, this peace, journeying, this peace has a real existence towards which it is growing, of which it is a phenomenal expression currently, a partial expression. And in this journey, it effectively undergoes a new birth. And that's why you will find in almost all the religious traditions, there is this idea of a transition into a new birth. When you are anointed into the spiritual life, when you are initiated into the spiritual life, when you have made that radical decision that now you focus on this journey, and there is a change in your consciousness, either at that moment or subsequently through the grace of the Guru, whatever happens. You may undergo a series of new births perhaps, but all of them move towards this real existence. That's why you will find even in certain religious traditions they speak of born again, because literally it is an experience of a complete psychological recasting. In the Hindu tradition, they speak of the new birth that takes place when you are initiated into the spiritual life by the Guru. And at that point, you are given sometimes a new name, depending on what it is that you are being initiated to. Sometimes even when you become a sannyasi, you do not belong anymore to the old world. You belong to a new world in a new consciousness. At least that's the idea. So you actually let go of everything past, including the past old clothes that you have now to bundle and burn. And you wear new clothes, which represent now the new consciousness that you're going to live by. Of course, in practice, all of these involve a small part of our consciousness that has changed. We're still pretty much the same person. And so there's always this schism within ourselves: which part of me is in the new, which is old. But we move steadily. So from this point now, we are going to focus on the preparation. And the rest of the chapter is all about the preparation. And the first necessity of preparation is the purifying of all the members of our being. And how that is to be done is the rest of the journey, is the rest of the discussion in this chapter. We can pause here. The purified understanding. Yes. Uh-huh. Exactly. Mhm. Yes. Right. Yes. She is sharing her experience in reading Premananda Kumar's commentary on Savitri, where she first explains and then you come to the line, so that you have got prepared and then suddenly the line goes straight in. So in this case, what is the nature of the purification which he will describe in the rest of the chapter? For the mind, for the heart, for the will, even for the senses. In what way you will remove the things which come in the way of receiving. The commonest difficulty is disturbance, agitation, activity, mechanical activity, old habits. To free ourselves from these things would be a first step of purification. So that when the divine consciousness reaches out to touch you, you have a base that is still in which it can settle. If the surface of the water is agitated, the reflection is broken. That's the analogy given. So that purification is the stilling in this case. So what is the nature of the purification for each of the parts, and how are we to do that? That we will see later. But if that purification is not there, whatever comes is unable to get a hold within us. And even if it gets a partial hold, because our reception is not correct, it is distorted. So high spiritual revelation could come, but your understanding of it and your registration of it would be completely mixed. This is often the case in many founders of religions. And so, depending on what has come through and how relevant it is or how complete it is, the religion lasts or not. Or even as we see today, in certain religions, there are aberrations. There are descriptions, very beautiful, uplifting spiritual passages, and then there are passages which are completely unacceptable to the modern context. And so the religion is caught in internal conflict. And this is because the person receiving, articulating the revelation himself could not hold it in its fullness. Doesn't mean the revelation itself was wrong, but the registration was mixed and the revelation was perhaps partial. It's the same thing now for us at an individual level. I give an example here, it's just an amusing example. There was a Dilip Kumar Roy, was a great bhakta of Sri Krishna. And having come to Sri Aurobindo, he used to still have doubts, very serious doubts. And Sri Aurobindo took great pains to write to him long letters. The largest collection of the longest letters are all to him. And yet eventually, after Sri Aurobindo left his body, he left the ashram. But during the time he was here and he had these doubts, Nirod Baran asked Sri Aurobindo, why don't you clear his doubts once and for all and just reveal to him who you are, and something like that. And Sri Aurobindo says, what can I do? Every time I do that, he again sees it in the old way that he's used to seeing. He's not able to recognize what it is that is being revealed to him. So you find this is an example of how the divine could go a long way in giving you whatever you need. But if your receptivity is not there, it will somehow get muddied. And you may even take what comes for the benefit to serve the old consciousness or the old habit or the old conception or limitation. And that's when the divine finds it necessary to withdraw. So that you're allowed now to exhaust your old conception, come to the painful recognition that this fails, this is not enough, and I need something more. And then you turn asking for something greater, then he can give more. You understand why the divine needs to withdraw sometimes. But again, that is to assist the preparation. So here the starting point is once we understand, yes, we need to prepare, and we start making that effort consciously, then perhaps those needs for withdrawal or the distortions in our registration will be reduced. in terms of the integral yoga, what the most general preparation that Sri Aurobindo and the mother insisted on was the preparation of the contact with the psychic being and the bringing in of the psychic vibration into all parts of our nature. That is the single most important in terms of preparation, and to the extent that that grows, all the other results will automatically tend to happen. But at the same time, if you're conscious that the mind needs to be taught to be still, the heart needs to be taught to be freed from desire, from attraction and repulsion, and so on, you can work on that at the same time. But when you bring into it the psychic vibration, it makes that preparation the most rapid and most stable. Even Sri Aurobindo writes that it was his intention to write many more chapters in the synthesis of yoga, which he could not write from lack of time later on. But they would have dealt with what happens when the supramental consciousness descends and how the layers in between would tend to distort and all the difficulties that would happen even in that effort of the bringing down of the supramental consciousness. Now again, that all points to the difficulty of preparation. The mind is unable to receive the supramental consciousness as it descends and even distorts what comes from there. Later on in the yoga of self-perfection, when Sri Aurobindo casts out the form of the integral yoga proper, he describes it in terms of 6 limbs. But before the 6 limbs, there is the purification, which is like the base. So you will see that pattern already established here in the yoga of integral knowledge. The purification here is the base upon which then other things happen. He will discuss later the tools of concentration and renunciation. If the mind has not been taught to become quiet, then your concentration will always be unstable. The renunciation will always be mixed, partial, unstable. So the moment you have worked on stilling the mind, suddenly the power of concentration is enormously amplified. And everything after that becomes easy. And then as through the concentration you're able to touch a consciousness, a touch of the self, as peace or as light, that fills the consciousness and teaches it to become even more profoundly still, even more profoundly receptive. And finally, the receptivity will have to do with familiarity with that which we are seeking to realize. To take the example of Mother's comment when she spoke of the supramental manifestation on February 29th, 1956, she said she was surprised that most people were not even aware that something so extraordinary had happened. And she said simply it's because they had not done the preparation. That there was nothing in them which had the familiarity with the supramental consciousness to be able to recognize that it had come. And that's again a part of the preparation. So the preparation takes place in many ways, but this last part of familiarity is when literally the consciousness now knows that for what it is, but also then in knowing it begins to aspire and seek it. So that when that comes, everything in the consciousness is open and receives and holds. Of course, Sri Aurobindo himself is an example. But again, the idea is it is all in degrees. So we need not worry too much. You are yourself an example in terms of purity what you were 10 years ago and what you are now. If there has been a steady spiritual growth, the purity of your consciousness will have grown, your receptivity will have grown, and so on, isn't it? Absolute purification, I don't know whether Sri Aurobindo alone that I know of in this matter. There are people who have reached great experiences in consciousness, great states of consciousness, but the complete purity of the physical consciousness may not have been there because it was not in their priority. It is only in Sri Aurobindo's articulation of the integral yoga that the emphasis on the purification of the physical consciousness and its transformation is given. So I do not know anybody outside Sri Aurobindo himself and the mother. In terms of our life here, there is one thing which is a special gift that Sri Aurobindo and the mother have left us, which is of an enormous help for the purification and receptivity of the physical consciousness, and through it of the nervous, vital, emotional, and mental consciousness. And even for the emergence of the psychic vibration in all these parts. And this gift is the physical reality of the samadhi, where in the physical contact with the body, you can feel a certain vibration entering it. And if the body is taught to familiarize itself, to yearn for that vibration, and to hold it and cherish it, very quickly there is a purification that takes place in the body consciousness, a sensitivity to the psychic vibration and the spiritual vibration, and a familiarity grows in which one finds, and especially with the imprint of the peace that comes through in that contact, you can receive and you can hold. And it is a physical gift because you can receive it from the physical contact. But one has still to make the effort to work on the absorption, familiarization, the yearning, and the containing. And when that is not there, and we are not able to retain it on our own, one can feel the difference in the body consciousness and through the body on the other levels. The mind can be made more easily pure in terms of stillness, receptivity, and familiarity. But for the body, which is much more difficult, this is a tremendous help. The physical vibration of what Sri Aurobindo's body and the mother's body held is now held here and transmitted to us to whatever extent we can make proper use of it. It's a very precious gift. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. There are many here who have done nothing else except just allow that vibration to soak in, and all these sensitivities have opened up. But on the other hand, if they don't have access to that, they quickly lose it because they have not worked to cultivate it and retain it. But even the sensitivity both to the psychic vibration and the supramental consciousness grow with that. Mother speaks also how they have brought a certain densification in the atmosphere around here, around the samadhi, around the ashram main building. Earlier it used to extend much farther in that full density, and now increasingly around the Matrimandir you feel a similar density. The densification of the atmosphere has a similar effect. What you may miss there, of course, is the physical contact of touching, which takes place with the samadhi. But if you can feel that densification of the atmosphere, you can absorb it directly, and a similar result is had even without the physical contact. Interesting. I don't know if you could hear. She said that people don't know that even from the picture of the Matra Mandir, you can feel that vibration. But if you place also a glass of water on it, that vibration seeps in. Yes, anything. Mhm. Mhm. The trees are often more receptive than human beings. So the trees which have been in that space, they soak in and then they transmit through their life force the same vibration. So when you enter in relation with the tree, which is easier because it's a connection of life energy, that vibration comes in through what you get from the tree. And so they become like, I would use a technical term, transducer. That is, they convert from a higher vibration to a lower density of vibration, that kind of consciousness. So these are all special gifts. And the water, which you mentioned also, it can hold that. Mhm. Yes. That's true. That's true. The water is something remarkable for not only its receptivity but also its ability to transmit. That's why you'll find in all the rituals in temples, they use water as the primary transmission for spiritual force also, even as a prasad or in transmitting the energy to the idol or to hold the energy as in a special container. Because water is able to absorb any kind of vibration, positive or negative, and retain it. So water, specially charged in this way, can have a tremendous effect. Mhm. Yes, yes. Purification of the physical. The physical culture can be made a means for purification of the physical. That doesn't mean that just doing mechanically physical exercise will get you the purification. You have to do it with that awareness and with that intention to make the body conscious. And then to make it conscious of what? It's one thing for the body to be more conscious, but it's conscious of itself and of its sensations. But is it conscious of the psychic vibration, of the spiritual presence, of the self, of the supramental? And it can be taught. Yes. So the near death experience is often life changing. But when you remember the near death experience, it is much more life changing. Many people have been on that side and come back with no memory, except an imprint of something vague felt. But generally, it's when they come back with the full memory of it that it has the most powerful imprint. But think of it in this way, it's not the fact of near death and being on the other side. It's the fact of having experienced the spiritual consciousness in itself, free of the limitations of the body consciousness. For a brief while, they were disengaged from the body, experienced that in its own terms, and then came back. So that's what we read in Sri Aurobindo's description here, that when he says to know it, the, the final summit of knowledge can only be attained by entering into the superconscious and there merging all other experience into a supernal unity. This entering into the superconscious consciousness freely without the dulling of the body consciousness is what is their character of that transforming experience. But this we can have in a state of deep meditation equally. But for that we must practice going deep and being able to freely enter the superconscious states. Okay. No, actually, what changes people from the near-death experience is not the danger of death. It's the experience of the thing on the other side. That's yes. Mhm. Yes. I think we can close this here. We will continue this passage after some gap. Unfortunately, I have to go out for a little over 1 month. So we will continue this text on the April. I'll be out practically most of March, and so we'll continue this on April 17th. And we will have the session on Sunday, of course, as usual. I had brought another text. Let me quickly read it, where Sri Aurobindo makes reference to Wordsworth, because we had read that uh, from the Letters on Yoga, page 896. Sri Aurobindo says, mental realization is useful at the beginning and prepares spiritual experience. It can help too at the beginning, but also it can hinder. It depends on the sadhak. And then he says, Wordsworth's experience also was mental. Mental experiences are, of course, a good preparation, but to stop there leaves one far away from the real thing. And then he discusses when it becomes spiritual. He says, it, the realization of the divine in the mind, is a certain kind of living cognition of which there are two parts. The living perception in thought, rising as far as intuition or revelation, the vivid mental feeling and reproduction of what is thus known in the substance of mind. Thus, the one in all is felt, seen, realized by the mind by a sort of inner mental sense. The spiritual realization is more concrete than that. One has the knowledge by a kind of identity in one's very substance. So you can read the rest of the letters. You can meditate briefly and chant Om. Om.